we're gonna start by talking a little bit about where we are and what's going on. This is a solidarity action for the September 9th nationwide prison shutdown and work stoppage protest. It's the largest protest in the history of the world, probably, inside prisons. The largest prison protest ever. We don't know exactly how big it is because a lot of times when prisoners do anything, even if they're doing like non-violent direct action sit-ins and things like that, the prison responds like, you know, they go on red alert straight away, so they lock the whole facility down. Which is good on one level because that means that nobody in there is working, and it is the functional equivalent of a strike. It's bad on the other side because that means that they lose access to the phones, they lose access to communication, so we don't know what's going on in facilities that are locked down. We know that there are a scattering of facilities across the country that are on lockdown. The prisons are not saying it's because of organizing or work strikes. We know that there are prisoners in Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, California, Portland. Yeah, so we know that there are prisoners taking action today all across the country, and we know that we don't know a lot more about what's going on the inside. And we won't know for another week or two once they get off lockdown or once they manage to get mail out and inform us about things. So we really need everybody to continue paying attention to this. It will be an ongoing thing. The work stoppages in Alabama especially, they're calling for this to last at least a month of refusing to work, which will bring the prisons to like the brink of not being able to function. In Alabama, when they did that in 2014, they lasted 3 weeks. And at the end of those 3 weeks, the CEOs were so sick of doing all the work, because normally the CEOs do nothing but turn keys. And now they have to actually like make food and deal with the laundry and do all the jobs. And so they were ready to go on strike as well because they were being forced to do overtime and do actual work. And so if we can last a month, if prisoners can last a month, and if this can spread and take on, then the prisons cannot function anymore, and it becomes a real crisis, and it forces change. This is direct action forcing change to occur in like the policies of prisons all across the country. So it's hugely impactful. It's really important that we on the outside do what we're doing right now. So everybody, like, give a cheer to yourselves and ourselves for coming here and doing this. And so we're going to talk a little bit about like the local context and what's going on in Wisconsin and what's going on in Milwaukee and what is going on in this building right here. And Alan has prepared the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee of the IWW. As soon as we put out mailings to people in prison in Wisconsin, there were people who were immediately ready to begin protesting. The conditions are so desperate and so awful. And we learned really quickly that the issue of mental health treatment and long-term solitary confinement are severe here in Wisconsin. It stands out compared to other states in the country. And so there were prisoners who began a hunger strike. And the hunger strike is demanding an end to long-term solitary confinement. The UN says that more than 15 days in solitary confinement is torture. And earlier this year in the spring, the Wisconsin Department of Corrections said, we're going to limit our use of solitary confinement to only 90 days. And they patted themselves on the back for that, and they were like, oh, we're wonderful, benevolent people, because we're limiting the use of solitary confinement to like, I don't know, 8 times as much as constitutes torture according to the UN. But this is the reform, this is their improvement. And they got all on the news and on the media for this. And meanwhile, there are guys in prison doing years in solitary confinement who know they're going to continue to do years in solitary confinement, and that's a lie. Because the Wisconsin Department of Corrections did not limit solitary confinement to only 90 days. They limited what they called restrictive housing to 90 days. And they continued to use administrative confinement as indefinite. And now those prisoners are demanding a limit of 365 days on the use of solitary confinement, 1 year cap. And they've been protesting since June 7th. And the DOC has not budged an inch. So it is still true that you can spend decades in torture conditions in the state of Wisconsin. And there are guys who have done 25 years in solitary confinement at Waupun and in other prisons in this state. On June 7th, they started their protest. There were reports of up to like 30 people participating in the hunger strike starting off on June 7th. We had a big rally and march here June 10th in solidarity with them. On June 17th, the Department of Corrections began force feeding people. They would shove a tube down your nose and force like nutritional sludge through that tube into your stomach. And they started doing this 3 times a day. And there's no reason to do that after 10 days on hunger strikes. It's not a health emergency, it's not a crisis. People's organs are fine after only 10 days. The only reason to do that is because it is painful and damaging and torturous. So the DOC added more torture on top of the torture of solitary confinement when these guys resisted. And the reason they were in solitary confinement in the first place is because they were resisting. They were filing lawsuits and they were fighting back and they were desperate. And some of them tried to escape. And as soon as you begin to fight back or protest against what's going on inside the prison, when you're inside the prison, then the guards target you and you become a target. You get targeted for harassment, you are attacked, you are, you have bullshit tickets written up against you and charges and things like that. And it is relentless. And it creates a desperate situation, and people in that situation act desperately. And then as soon as they break, as soon as you snap and you defend yourself or take action of some kind, then you're a violent, criminal-minded, terrible person who needs to be tortured more in solitary confinement. They throw you down. And that's what's going on with Cesar De Leon, with LaRon McKinley, and the other guys who've been on this Dying to Live hunger strike. On August 13th, we organized a protest where we went up to Waupun. We got 40 people to go with us up to the town of Waupun, which is a prison town. There's 3 different prisons within 5 blocks of each other there. And we marched around the prison and we made a big noise. I think it was a powerful demonstration. And immediately after that, the DOC responded with more torture for the guys who were on the hunger strike. That was a Saturday. On Monday, they stopped force feeding people. And they went from force feeding them 3 times a day to no intake, no nutrition at all. And the water in Waupun is poisonous, it's polluted, it's terrible. It's full of very high lead and copper levels, but they trick the testers who come through. They like run the water out of the prison to flush the pipes, and then when the testing is coming through, so the levels are acceptable. But normally the water is murky. It's like foggy with the pollutants in it. And so the guys on hunger strike couldn't drink this water. It was causing them like diarrhea, and it was terrible and it's damaging to them. So they're refusing to drink water as well. Human body can't live more than 72 hours without water. And even if they had drank the water and then got diarrhea, they would be dehydrated. And so that puts them in this state of malnourishment, dehydration. This was like 60, 70 days into the hunger strike. And so then after 72 hours, exactly 72 hours, at the point where organs were about to fail, the DOC was like, okay, now we're gonna force feed you. And they shoved the tube down their throat and they put the sludge into their stomachs. And what that causes is called refeeding syndrome. Your body goes into shock when you're not eating food and when you're dehydrated. And then when you suddenly get an intake of food, your body switches the way that it gets. There's science here that I don't fully understand, but your electrolytes are depleted and all of the energy goes into absorbing those foods and you become even more dehydrated. And there's a serious risk of death for the guys who are subjected to this regimen of starvation for 3 days, sudden intake of food. And it's called refeeding syndrome. If you want to look it up, it happens to people who are in a coma who are not.
It also happens to him.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so that's what's going on. And now, as of a few days ago, after enduring this for weeks, Cesar is refusing. He is not going to go he sent us a letter saying that he is no longer going to cuff up and come out of his cell to go to the force feedings. What they normally do is they open that little slot in your cell, you put your hands out there, they put handcuffs on it, you pull it back in, they close the slot, they bring you out of the cell, they strap you to a chair, they wheel the chair over to where they shove the tube down your nose. We've seen video of them doing this to Cesar. And he refuses now. He's not doing that anymore. And we got this letter saying that he was going to start that 2 days ago. And what that means, if you refuse a direct order to come out of your cell, that means that they will extract you from the cell. So this guy who has gone 95 days without solid food is now being violently attacked and dragged out of his cell. They're spraying gas into his cell, and then they are going in body armor, opening the door, rushing in, tackling him, grabbing him, dragging him out, strapping him to a restraint chair, or throwing him in a suicide cell, which they call them suicide cells if you if you're a suicide risk, they put you in the cell where you don't have clothes and you don't have anything, so you can't kill yourself. But they actually just use those to torture people because it's greater isolation and it's worse conditions and it's freezing cold and you don't have clothes and it's awful. So they call them suicide cells, but those are torture cells. That's like adding more and more torture onto these situations. So when we say that Wisconsin Department of Corrections is a torture chamber, we're not speaking figuratively. It is torture, and then more torture, and then more torture. And we don't know what's going on with Cesar de Leon right now. We know that 2 days ago, he refused to come out of his cell. He refused to orders. And we know that when that happens, they respond by extracting you with violence. We don't know if he's in the infirmary. We don't know if he's in a suicide cell. We don't know if he's back in his regular cell. We don't know anything about where he's at. And the DOC doesn't answer questions. They have not been accountable to this whole process from the very start. So that's the situation that we're in here in Wisconsin. And that is the risks and the pain and the suffering that our comrades on the inside are enduring to stand up against this system that does impact all of us. When the state can do that to somebody, then all of us on the outside know, and maybe many of us here who have like white middle class lives don't know it intimately. But the people, in Sherman Park who were fighting back on that same weekend that we went up to Waupun, we got back here and there were fires and there were riots and there were people standing up and fighting back as well. They know it intimately in their lives. They know that the police are a constant threat in their lives. And they know that at any time, on any pretext, they can get pulled into this system, they can be brought into this building and tortured, they can be taken to a prison somewhere and tortured. And that is a constant threat in their lives. And it's a threat that hangs over all of us every day. And so these guys who are fighting back, this is not a charity case, this is not about pity, this is about solidarity. This is about recognizing that they are fighting for freedom for everyone. And that's why it's important that we join that fight and that we fight back with them. A lot of times across the country there are people who are doing noise demos right now. There are 60 events on this weekend in solidarity with the September 9th strike. And in many of those events, they go to one of these buildings and they make a lot of noise and they have megaphones and drums and they're making all this racket. But we know that here in Wisconsin and in Milwaukee, these buildings are not set up to allow that. Sometimes they'll see the prisoners will flash the lights showing that they heard them. Or there's one where they wrote the word freedom on the window in solidarity. You can see the prisoners inside raising their fists. We have no chance to that because how this building is set up, these windows are fake windows. There's another building inside this building. The people inside there do not see the sun, and they cannot hear, no matter how loud we were out here, they cannot hear us. So the only way that we can express solidarity, and when we went to Waupun, it's 30-foot concrete walls and then buildings, and those buildings are set up the same way. The windows of the outer facing wall goes to a hallway, and then there's the cell walls and the cell doors and the windows that the people on the inside actually use. So to express our solidarity, we can't shout and make racket and make noise. And so instead what we're doing is calling in and writing postcards. So right now we've got 2 activities that we can do, and one is, who has to call in? Yeah, so Alan. The other thing we're doing is we're getting people started on sending letters right now. We've got these postcards. So what he was doing when he was in prison for cents on the hour was packing coffee for Starbucks, like holiday gift coffee bag things. And that journalist repeated that. Starbucks has not denied or has not announced that they've stopped using prison labor. So one of the companies that they hire to do the packaging for them uses prison labor to make that affordable. So we're gonna go to Starbucks. We're gonna go to the Starbucks at Red Arrow Park, which also has other important historical significance here in Milwaukee, as many people know. So what we need now is we need volunteers who will hand out these flyers on our way there, and once we get there, who will go in. We're going to go straight in. We're not going to lollygag outside. Some of us are going to go in and hand these flyers to the employees and anybody who is a customer. Does anybody else want